But the objective is to create sustainable conversations so that when you step away from the civic sphere is still talking about their community and what they want to happen to it. So just a couple of examples now. So Openly Local is a site that gathers together open data sets from councils in England. We've recently been asked, all councils have been asked to put all of their financial expenditure on anything worth more than £500 online and openly available. So this site tracks that, and it also tracks local communities that are coming online as well. Buckshall Village Forum is an example of a community website which actually was created before they finished building the town. So this is an example which was, again, we were talking about yesterday in the context of Mariavanta, which is that Buckshall Village organised itself digitally before they'd finished building the schools and the roads of Buckshall Village. And actually, when there were problems with the construction, they used this as the way of organising the public reaction to that. Now that Buckshall Village is actually finished and they have the schools and the roads, they use it to talk to the police officers in the area, and the council will use this as a first point of contact. Haringey Online. Haringey is a small part of one of the boroughs in London. And Haringey Online is such a successful community, it's now the first place that Haringey Council will consult when they have a question to go to the public about. And the organisers of this have actually gone on to do a really interesting piece of research, which is referenced in the slides, around these hyperlocal communities and the very measurable benefits that politicians and other service providers get from going to the community spaces as opposed to asking the community to come to them. Now, this is a blog, this is just one person, but this guy blogs 3 or 4 times a week about Royal Tunbridge Wells, where he lives. He's a fanatic for it. He says that a day spent anywhere else is a day wasted. But the advantage is, because thousands of people read the blog, is if the council need to communicate something, he is a more trusted source than they are. So when they needed to speak about the fact that they were having to make changes to a Victorian building that the police were working from, so similar to this building, is it wasn't suitable for modern policing and needed to be turned into something else. The most effective communication channel they had was by giving this guy a tour of the Victorian police station and making sure that he understood its limitations. So rather than going out with lots of broadcast publicity, which is what they would have done before, they were able to engage really authentically with thousands of people by finding the person that the community trusted. The important thing here, though, is absolutely none of those sites have been created by government. So there is an enormous amount of social capital there, of civic social capital, which is not actually needed to be created by government. And the first thing I'm saying to you is you should be finding out what is going on in your communities in this space, because we've not yet looked at a region where there isn't increasingly activity around civic social creation. The issue there then is that people are talking, but they're not necessarily talking to government. So previously, and again, this isn't such an issue here in Finland as it is in the UK. But in the UK, while we're under enormous financial pressure and the state is withdrawing from people's lives, it really puts on the table the question of what is the relevance of government. Is that previously we controlled the resources, and you're always in the conversation if you're writing a cheque. But if you're not writing a cheque, how do you make sure that you're relevant? How do you make sure you're essential to what's going on? When increasingly the public can organise for themselves. And this is the question again, is that why do you care when you're trying to reduce the size of your budget? And I think the answer here is something that we touched on at the beginning, is that because you have to stay relevant. Is if people have digital lives, government needs to have a role in those digital lives. You need to stay relevant. I sometimes use the analogy of saying the social web, and in particular Facebook, it's like a different country. You send an embassy to a different country. You have a cultural attaché, you connect to it, and it's exactly the same with the social web. But the big answer here, I believe, is that it's your responsibility to make sure that as we listen to, and as people organise more online, is that you're making sure that what is happening as a result of that is representative, fair and democratic. Because where communities form themselves, they're not necessarily caring about whether or not they represent all bits of the community. They're not necessarily caring about the people who are not there. And I believe that one of the primary responsibilities, particularly of a democratic government, is making sure that the community is representative of everybody who's living there. And so you know, the conversations are going to happen anyway, and increasingly they're going to happen in a way that you can look at. And so the question is how do you make sure they're democratic? And that the answer that we work towards is the idea of a local civic space. So what we've been talking about so far is informal social and informal civic behaviours. People getting themselves organised online and talking to each other, whether or not it's to their friends and family or to their community. At the other end of this, you've got the formal democratic and the formal consultation processes, which you've already got online. What I'm arguing for is the need for a shared space in the middle of that, where informal civic activity, those community websites I showed you, can come together with formal democracy in order to make democratic decisions. That's what I'm talking about in terms of the civic architecture. So one of the ways in which we've done, I just wanted to quickly whiz you through. We did a project recently, a funded project which finished last year called Citizenscape, which was an attempt to look at these issues. We worked in Bristol in the UK, in Donegal in Ireland, in Genoa in Italy, and in Žilina, which is in Slovakia. And what we did is created some of these civic spaces in order to test some of the ideas which we're talking about. And the main evaluation findings from that are really largely what informs a lot of the presentation I'm giving you today. So the first thing was that this idea, which was the idea that you could just start one of these, to just start a civic space, was a false assumption. What you need to do is find out what's already going on and respond to that. So you're not doing it to an area, you're doing it with an area. The next thing is that all of the councils involved were very disappointed at the lack of control that they had over the conversation. Is that this is really an area where you end up listening more than you end up talking. Because actually, you know, this is an opportunity to find out what people are really interested in. And sadly, it's often not what government wants them to be talking about, and you just have to accept that. The other thing we found was that community ambassadors is creating a network of the people who are influential in their communities, which you already know, because you already do this in an offline context, is to find the online influencers as well. So the guy who writes the Tunbridge Wells blog is not going to be an offline influencer. You'd probably never meet him in a community meeting or at a parish council meeting. Online, he's tremendously significant for that area. And the last thing is that you just have to accept the transparency of the social web. And so if you want to be creating a space about a particular topic, you have to put all the information that you have there. You can't control what you tell people. And the other thing, the last thing, was this idea of a very defined call to action. These can be very messy, very chaotic, certainly to someone who's not millennial generation. It's important to give a call to action which lets people know what you're actually asking them to do. So the challenges are pretty clear around creating a sort of repeatable and a manageable public participation. And increasing, and the tools that we create around this are not particularly rocket science, but what you're saying is a website like this is no longer something which is created from one source. Every area of that page comes from a different source, a different bit of the community. And what that then starts to mean is that you can see a shared tag cloud, and you can get a very quick visual representation of all of the topics that the community are talking about. So this is one we did around, it's around a sustainability project. And so rather than just seeing environmental issues as one big topic, you start to see it broken down into the language that the public are actually using. And by layering in other tools like Twitter, like news feeds, like calendars of the actual physical events where people are getting together, and tools like petitions and lots of use of video, you start to be able to put together a really detailed picture of what the content is in an area for a locality. And from that, you have a much richer relationship with the public who are there. So you need to make sure you understand where you're going to add value to this process, and you want to make sure that what you're not doing is trying to do something which the public do better for themselves. I just wanted to quickly note is that we think that open data is a significant area for government here, and that WikiLeaks is the tip of the iceberg, because in many ways that's not significant at a local level, but it does talk about the changing culture and the expectations of the public, and issues of openness, I think, is something which government at every level is going to be asked to address more and more. And so when you're thinking about building your technology for the future, you need to be thinking about the fact that the public increasingly are going to be asking for data feeds. And they're going to want to do it for two reasons. They're going to want to audit what you're doing, but they're also increasingly going to want to build applications. They're going to want to create technological applications for themselves. And why not? It saves you having to do it. So I won't go into detail on this. We recently ran an event called City Camp, and I did say yesterday, I think Helsinki is an area which could really deliver something like a city camp. It's an international movement. So it started in the States, it's running across the world. And the idea of a city camp is you're bringing all elements of the population together, the public, the private and the community, into one space for 3 days. And what you're doing is you're asking them to actually talk about and then solve particular issues for the city. So it's a pro-social few days. And the result from City Camp Brighton is that actually it was a project called My Urban Angel. And My Urban Angel was created by a project team that had 16-year-olds in it, that had police officers, that had council staff, and had members of the community. And they came together, and they came together spontaneously on the Saturday, and on the Sunday they built a prototype of an application which will let young people share where they are on a night out with friends, but also be able to find safe places very quickly, and interestingly find safe people. Because we'll be using real-time data, as a young person will be able to say, find me the nearest police officer. Because the police officer, because the system knows where the police officer is, the application will be able to guide the young person to it. Now, we were very lucky to have a £10,000 prize donated, which obviously got everybody quite excited. But the idea is one which is going to turn into a sustainable enterprise. So the idea here is we're not creating another hungry mouth to feed. We're creating a project which can go on to be self-sufficient. And it's tremendously exciting, and it's a really good example about what we're talking about. I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail. The conclusion here, though, is that you have an event horizon of 5 or 10 or 20 years. You have that event horizon when you talk about your physical buildings, and if you're talking about developing an area, you know that's how far in the future you're thinking about. What I'm saying is you need to think about the relationship which you're going to have with the citizens over that time, and you need to take into account this social shift of a more networked society. And you need to think about, in 10 years' time, the people who will be voting, the people who will be working in your organisations, you will have a very different relationship with the state to the one that people have now, and it's evolving rapidly. And you need to start thinking now about how you want to shape that and how you want that to work in the future, because otherwise it's moving too quickly for you to be able to adjust and work productively with it.